Hey there, welcome to episode 42 of the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program, a show about entrepreneurialism and innovation in our ecosystem here in Southern Nevada. I am your host, Dan Hugo. Today, I am recording this on the morning of December 15. It's Friday. Lovely, lovely Friday here in Southern Nevada. So episode 42 already. Yay. Join me in celebrating slightly. Today, we're going to talk about why we need entrepreneurs in residence in our ecosystem. We need ecosystem EiRs. So that's EiR, entrepreneur in residence. This is someone or someones who not only know the ins and outs of entrepreneurship, but they are familiar with the ecosystem enabling or hampering entrepreneurial efforts in which they are. There are some who believe you could be an entrepreneur anywhere, but I will suggest, as I have in previous episodes, and we should probably do an actual focus on this, that the ecosystem itself is an essential component. You cannot put a freshwater fish in a saltwater body of water, salt body of water. So merely moving to Vegas from Silicon Valley, merely moving to Vegas from Utah, merely moving to Utah from Silicon Valley does not automatically guarantee entrepreneurial experience. Past performance is no guarantee of future outcomes, as they say. So we should seek out EiRs, or you should consider being one. First, the links, if you are viewing or listening to that. Viewing someday. We'll talk about that another time. If you are listening on your favorite podcasting tool, hopefully the platform from which you get your podcast does share the show notes, the description of the show. I usually put show note summary and did you hear that? My phone making a little noise there. I usually put the summary and then some links that are relevant to the actual show. So I will point out specifically the first two as they're formatted right now. That could change, but I have added my personal buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo link. If you are interested in supporting these efforts, like a tip jar. This is not a call for sponsors, and you also do not have to throw any money in the tip jar, so to speak. But I do use that page to connect all of my creative works, and if anyone wants to support them in general or just to find them, it's I call it an out-of-band page, so it's not based on a personal blog or a business website or so on. So buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo, DANHUGO. Check that out. And then I also have a Ko-fi page, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo also. I haven't really used that as much, but I'm going to start. These are just extra ways to be found that are not legacy social media. Some of the other links. I have a Wikipedia link that describes what an EiR is. It does a pretty good job. Entrepreneur in residence. What exactly is an entrepreneur in residence? Forbes article on founders in residence, which is a sort of a special case for entrepreneur in residence. So you can be entrepreneurial, but to be an actual founder has one or two extra things to be aware of. So check out that article if you want. There's a Wikipedia page on community of practice, which I will get to. I have talked about community of practice in the past. My assertion will be that our cohort of EiRs at any given time should be a part of a community of practice. And did you know that the Nevada Governor's Office of Economic Development, GOED, has, thanks to legislation from this year, and as part of the Joe Lombardo campaign for governor, which he did become our governor, so that plank kicks in, the Office of Entrepreneurship is operational. They're growing the organization in different parts of the state, including here in Vegas, to serve the Southern Nevada, Clark County, presumably, region. So you can check that out. It's goed.nv.gov/entrepreneur, linked in the show notes. So let's get it started. You can refer to these notes and read those links if you want. What is an EiR, entrepreneur in residence? Traditionally, if you are an EiR at a company or at a, more likely, historically, at an investment firm, a VC firm, a law firm, maybe at a school, maybe at an accelerator, incubator, you are an actual entrepreneur with some sort of track record, either by some measure of quote unquote success, or you've perhaps exited your entrepreneurial venture. You maybe sold it. Maybe it was bought out. Whatever the circumstance, you find yourself with some spare time. Entrepreneurs so often have so little time. So an entrepreneur between gigs, as I've written in my notes here. So you are still entrepreneurial. You probably have an idea that you're cooking. Maybe take your newfound wealth or debt or whatever your circumstances are from your recent success, and you're going to take some time in the interim and help others in their ventures, adventures perhaps. So you're between gigs. You can take an EIR role at any of those places I mentioned, and more common to have more diverse hosts of EIRs. That is, in the past, you'd be an EIR at an accelerator or at a venture capital company or at a law firm. Now they're expanding. Maybe you're an EIR at a school, or maybe you're an EIR, as I will propose, in an economic entrepreneurial ecosystem. So an economy of scale, some sort of city, county, maybe even state, maybe all. Maybe there needs to be tiers, but we'll get to that. So as I say here, it's they've got the been there, done that advice, and they can give that advice on both sides. If you are doing something new as an entrepreneur, hopefully you are, but you don't have to. Entrepreneurialism is not necessarily about novel innovation, but you're doing something that is not necessarily familiar to everyone. The EIR or EIRs can help bridge that gap between your VC directors and investors and so on, and their potential investments. You, as an EIR, might be able to help navigate that discussion to a place of mutual understanding and then maybe even mutual benefit, because a novel approach to an old problem, a novel approach to a new problem, a unusual market, etc. The list goes on. So an EIR is there to offer that bit of expertise from real world experience. If you are a VC, who isn't? If you're a VC, you probably see the world through that lens. So an EIR, an entrepreneur in residence, sees it through the entrepreneurial lens, maybe even sees it through a founder funder, or maybe they become a VC after some successful exits, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a person who fills the gap between the VC view of the world and of their potential investment in an individual entrepreneurial venture, and the view of the VC and that world from the entrepreneurs themselves, the founders, et cetera. The founders et al., I should say. So the EIR is there to be an expert witness of sorts. You can check out those pages. And if you just look for EIR, you can see many places have actual programs, some well-known schools, some businesses, some investment funds, etc. So it's becoming more common to have that expertise in-house, a part of the team. So I think it's a good idea. And that's why we had the Genius Roundtable in 2022. We started in 2023. We started the Notion late in 2022. So late January 2023, we kicked off our first cohort. There were intended to be 3 meetings once a month for 3 months in the first cohort, and then a new cohort. Why? Because entrepreneurs are busy. Entrepreneurs are busy. And so you cannot possibly ask for someone who's in the entrepreneurial cockpit trying to fly through the canyon of the valley of death? No, what is it? You're just trying to make sure your company doesn't fold. So you have things to do. So this was a minimalist approach to participation, but where the goal was to understand our entrepreneurial ecosystem from the perspective of actual entrepreneurs who are operating in that ecosystem. And then, so gather that understanding and sort of gather it together from the bottom up. So not from, it's very difficult to justify, in my opinion, an office of economic development for a city that employs people, their employees, to have them steer an entrepreneurial ecosystem or components of it. First of all, I think an ecosystem is too complicated to control like that. But second, you cannot possibly believe that a room full of employees that are possibly not in touch with any aspect of being entrepreneurial are making or breaking entrepreneurship oriented decisions about the ecosystem and how it might impact them. The example I will give is the belief that our ecosystem here should become some sort of a Silicon Valley knockoff to promote tech. And I would say real entrepreneurs on the ground might say, well, a lot of people come here because it's a destination city with entertainment and restaurants and other, not to mention the fun economy components, the gaming and the entertainment and tourism in general, conventions, and now professional sports. So people come here for a myriad of reasons. They may or may not be thinking, there must be a unicorn application developer company here, some startup that will become the next Google or Facebook. That's not necessarily where our ecosystem has developed over time. So from the top down to believe that steering that direction will benefit more people is questionable. That's why I personally favor a bottom-up view, direct participation, awareness, discussion by people who are quote unquote on the ground in the ecosystem. So we had the roundtable. The outcome was not great. We basically killed it after the second cohort because of a lack of participation. And I quite literally just finished my other weekly production, the Let's Innovate for Vegas Foundation podcast. Innovate for Vegas Foundation podcast. Let's Innovate for Vegas. Similar problem, the What's in it for me challenge. There has to be a long view that contribution as an EIR today will ultimately repay you later, but that the time spent now will ultimately be beneficial not only for you, but for others. And being an entrepreneur sometimes means solving problems rather than waiting for someone else to do it. So taking some sort of ownership, quote unquote ownership, of our entrepreneurial ecosystem as an entrepreneur means that you are going to understand it better. You're going to be something of an authority. And if you are an EIR at city scale, then your name will become synonymous with entrepreneurialism in Southern Nevada or elsewhere. That was the idea. So Nevada wants to be a leader in entrepreneurship. This was a campaign plank, as I said. So we're going to lead the nation in entrepreneurial something. Do you measure starts or finishes? Do you measure startup when you get your business license or you print your business cards? Do you look at exits when you sell your company and your investors make their money back? So that might be what are the OKRs and KPIs? That's a question. The GoEd, as I mentioned, has launched or is launching. They're still hiring. In fact, I applied for one of the jobs. Why not? I don't believe I'll get it, but GoEd Office of Entrepreneurship is launching and growing and scaling its efforts to make Nevada a leader in entrepreneurship. So the roundtable, which I just described, was to take this top-down approach. So this is the governor's office, the state, with all of its bureaucracies and infrastructure, but also all of its funding and grant monies and access to federal funds and so on. The right to start, the probably some sort of relationship with the recent legislation, AB 77 and 75, about the ability to become an investor without the same or the previously existing accreditation requirements as an investor. I think that was 75. And the availability of funds for a more diverse population of entrepreneurs. We'll see how that goes. There's always a question about funding local startups that are actually here and contributing to the local economy, which I personally believe would be one of the economic indicators and a KPI or at least an OKR when you have government/public funds flowing into things. But ultimately, entrepreneurs in Nevada are sometimes here on paper Just like they incorporate in Delaware, you can incorporate in Nevada. You can say you're a Nevada startup, but then you're in Singapore and Israel, for example, or other places, right? So this happens. It happens all the time. There is a question that never really gets answered directly about what it means to be a Vegas startup or Nevada startup. But we are going to be an entrepreneurial leadership, an entrepreneurship leader, if I can speak. And I would like to see more bottom up or more awareness of this continuing ongoing development from the people that are doing it, from the people on the ground, bottom up, taking the time to understand exactly what the ecosystem is, what it is not, what it has, what it needs, what's working, what isn't. Sort of a full-time job, but could also be spread across a community of practice, which I've talked about in previous episodes. So I do have a link on there. Like I said, the Wikipedia page about community of practice. I don't think I mentioned this. I also have a link to the Wenger Trainer Community of Practice website and their introduction to community of practice. So those are the people that came up with this back in the 80s. I think it's worth a read. The Wikipedia page references that too, but I wanted to call it out specifically. Kind of the origin story of a community of practice. So we make our EiRs a community of practice. They have implied intent and expertise or willingness to develop it, sharing and education, and all the things that would go into being a part of this community of practice. So it's an idea that we will float again in 2024. Not everything is tech, by the way. This is where I get to the KPI part again. I believe when Nevada intends to be the number one entrepreneur state, however they phrase it, that they're really thinking we're going to be the next Silicon Valley mindset, which is not going to happen. We can make it easier for people to be entrepreneurial here. We can be supportive of by having a strong and growing and responsive ecosystem, which is not really, you can do things within an ecosystem. An ecosystem, I believe, takes time to develop. It is emergent. It's a combination with culture and then resources. And my 4 pillars are the the communities, the talent pool / education, the access to capital, and government regulation and support. But those are only the pillars. The actual ecosystem will develop itself. Our ecosystem here favors the fun economy. It really does. And there's nothing really wrong with that. The notion that we must break that by gentrifying and shifting the focus to becoming the next Silicon Valley, I think is fundamentally flawed. So not everything is tech. There are people that come here from Silicon Valley. You can invite them to come and then send them back home. I've done episodes of this very audio program on this before. I'm sure I will do them again. I'd very much like to have actual partakers in this notion of having a remote company that comes to the greater Vegas area, somewhere in Southern Nevada, either for a trade show or for an innovation sprint or so on, and see how that works for them as a case study. But anyway, so not everything is tech. Unfortunately, whenever people talk about entrepreneurialism here, the tech scene seems to get a lot of attention. I don't think they get a lot of support, but they get a lot of attention. So people will speak about it. Oh, the tech scene in Vegas. I've recently seen references to the Silicon Sandbox, which is actually Los Angeles. I don't know if people are thinking this is somehow a Silicon Sandbox. It is not. But if we divorce ourselves from this notion that we are to be the next Silicon Valley and so on and so on, the tech scene here is just like any other scene: the restaurant scene, the bar scene, the retail outlet scene, the wholesale outlet scene, the services scene. Being entrepreneurial can have many different focal areas. There can be different silos. And if we make sure that we don't favor one highly risky one, tech, against sort of established norms and known areas of strength and success. By the way, most startups, regardless of which of those areas they are in or others, still have a 20% success rate. That is, when you start a business of any kind, except for maybe some outliers like solopreneurships, consultancies, lifestyle businesses where you're not completely you're not dependent on a particular, profit and loss each month. But most actual businesses, especially if they intend to employ people and have customers and so on, 20% succeed after the first 5 years. I'm not sure what the ratio is on the first year, the first 2 years maybe, but in the first 5 years, 20% succeed or continue in operation. 80% fail. Restaurants, tech startups, etc. Those numbers are pretty close across the board. There have been different, you can get some data from Techstars, from Y Combinator on their success rate versus their total cohort sizes. In the restaurant business is famously, 1 in 5 restaurants succeeds as a cautionary tale. So tech is just as much a challenge as anything else, but you can, this is a city built on gambling, right? If you want to hedge your bets, don't put all of your chips on tech. One of the things I'm concerned with myself, and which I've talked about in previous episodes, and which I will again, is the consolidation of funding gatekeepers. The legislation in AB 77, I believe, if you read through it, it kind of seems like maybe it was, anyway, so there are some fewer and fewer entities that are promoting with states government support, either endorsement or financial or both. Our innovation, our ecosystem of entrepreneurialism and innovation, if I can mix all those words together. So it's interesting that we have fewer when you would believe that if we are to be successful, there should be more. Access to capital is basically what we're talking about in this case. Access to capital really is important. It's frequently identified as the one overriding concern for entrepreneurs in the greater Vegas area. Access to capital. How do I get more access to capital? So if we have fewer gatekeepers, if we have fewer entities either consolidating or just not forming here, I'm concerned that we don't really have the diversity of insight and the diversity of background and willingness to adjust risk levels, different pools of investors, different focal direction. If we're going to focus on biotech, maybe this is a good place, maybe not. If you're going to focus on gaming, this is probably a good place. So if you only have 1 or 2 or 3, and then if you're having them consolidate, if you only have a few places that are offering their sort of acceleration, incubation, any sort of access to investment, and you limit those to tech, which is one of the stated goals, is to focus on tech. If you believe that tech is the only way forward, if you're opening a restaurant, sorry, don't come here. We're not interested. But if your entrepreneurialism is focused completely on tech in a place that is dominated by non-tech entrepreneurialism, the question is, are you doing it to elevate the tech or are you doing it to replace the not tech? And if there's this mantra of we're going to be the next Silicon Valley driving things, I believe it's probably the latter. And I think that places all entrepreneurs at risk. And if you are an entrepreneur, you should consider that. Just my 2 cents there. The LVGEA, the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance, is a public-private entity that maybe controls or has some sort of oversight or maybe some insight into our economy here in Southern Nevada. Is focused on funding and exits and employment gains, specifically calling out as one of the KPIs for a new position they just hired, the entrepreneurial community development senior VP or something. I don't have it in front of me, but I've talked about this previously. The person that they did hire is a politician, arguably has founded one of the gatekeeping entities I mentioned. The problem is once you make a political process drive a entrepreneurial process, the politics will determine where the money goes, not economic realities, not entrepreneurial needs, not the concerns I've already expressed many times about our culture of innovation or lack of. And if your KPIs for that job role are about exits and employment gains in a particular area rather than on, and of course, access to capital. So how many starts are funded, how many of those go to the next rounds of investment. So how much money is flowing into the tech entrepreneurial endeavors. If you are focused on those, you may not be focused sufficiently on economic impact How many real jobs are being created? Well, if you're not a programmer, you can't work for our company. Oh, but if you have a diversity of entrepreneurial efforts and you don't focus so heavily on one particular area, then you broaden the scope of appeal for potential job creation or employment in general. This is interesting to consider when you look at our two most recent resort openings, one on the south part of the strip, the Durango, and one closer to sort of the middle, north middle. You could probably argue north. It's right across the street from Resorts World, and a bit of a walk. It's the Fontainebleau has opened after 16 years since they first broke ground. Both of these two new locations they were hiring. They were having massive hiring events, and they are still hiring, and probably will always be hiring. And we are finding that maybe perhaps due to the temporary cost of living increases, which in some cases have not been as temporary during the pandemic, with rises in rents and the closures of some places due to lockdown requirements and so on, many people in the service industry or in adjacent industries that were driven by tourism and people visiting here in general were priced out. So if your rent goes up by 25 to 40% and your job stops and you're completely dependent on unemployment benefits, extended or otherwise, you may find that moving to somewhere else makes more sense. And so our pool of potential employees for our destination city fun economy may be placed at risk. And if we make the future entrepreneurial focus on software engineers moving to Vegas, gentrifying, increasing cost of living, and not on general elevation of our opportunities for people across skill sets, we may not see all the benefits that people are excited about talking about today. We may end up being the next Silicon Valley, but not the good parts. So we'll see. EiRs are also mentors, by the way. That's, as I've described them, you're providing that insight to people on both sides, on the funding side or on the school side, but also on the entrepreneur side. Mentorship is something that has been lacking here, and I've heard this from multiple people, so I'm not just inventing this myself. Unfortunately, it wasn't like documented studies that have been done. They're anecdotal, but there is a concern, and as I've said, if the gatekeeping organizations that are steering funding and access to capital in general are focused heavily on tech, but they themselves are not tech people, then I would question whether there's enough mentorship there on those tech topics. If it's correlation thinking, that we can talk about another time, but probably the most obvious example of this would be Ray Dalio versus Peter Zeihan. I used to know how to say his name. Dalio is a correlation thinker, and he's been quite successful. Peter Zeihan is a causation thinker. So he is taking a systems approach. So if you understand the system and the terrain on which a particular entrepreneurial venture wishes to take off, wishes to pursue some sort of a business plan or a goal, if it's a tech-focused entity and you don't have an EIR in that realm of expertise, and you're basing insights offered to them on correlation thinking, that may or may not work out. So when you have a lot of diversity in your entrepreneurial ecosystem, as far as mentorship and insights and advice, mentorship is a critical component, and I believe, based on what I'm hearing, we can do better, and we should. So if we develop our EIR cohort, if we have a cadre of people who are skilled and willing, if they are interested and interesting, if they can connect our ecosystem and the entrepreneurs in it through their intent and experience in a community of practice, we just might be able to develop a cross-functional, cross-disciplinary pool of experts who can be the mentors that we need. Maybe even for money. Maybe an EIR program that is in some way funded to make it worth the time, but also with analysis done up front, transparently, to show how efforts put in at the beginning could have benefit at the end of a given interval. I don't know if there's an end, but actual stewards who are willing to be a part of this process to cultivate an innovation culture in general, to enable and encourage entrepreneurialism, to have some sort of insight and oversight of our entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem as it develops over time, to try to note what works and what doesn't, so that we can take action and to understand what those actions could be and how to measure whether they are working. And that was our first cohort of the Genius Roundtable, was some of those things I just mentioned. So rather than focusing on investment outcomes for tech startups, we could look at entrepreneurialism as an economic driver. We already know this. It's common knowledge. Anecdotally, for the purposes of this episode, small business makes up the vast majority of the United States economy. One person can start a company and hire one other person. That is difficult to do at an existing large company, to hire the equivalent ratio, right? So small businesses can move fast, hopefully not break things, and can be economic drivers. A food truck, a coffee shop, a retail outlet, a services business in general, consulting, the list goes on and on. Didn't even mention construction, road and building, putting in all those fiber optic cables thanks to BEAD funding, et cetera, et cetera. So there's plenty of room for entrepreneurialism. Start a company that does fiber optic cable installation without tearing up streets. How about that? So the need for stewards who will actually, from the bottom up, from the ground, from within, take ownership of understanding and hopefully steering the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem into the future is important. And I think it's overlooked. So this is my opinion. I think it's overlooked when you have a precious few sitting in boardrooms with government funding or titles on the door, trying to take a top-down approach and operate an entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem as though it were a business with measurable specific outputs like exits. Sometimes exiting is exiting. The benefit is not merely to the ecosystem. Not everything is about giving of yourself with nothing in return. Trust me, I do that all the time. But the EiRs benefit directly. 20% investment portfolio wins is probably typical. I'm sure there are pluses and minuses on that. But ecosystems that are city scale or county scale or state scale, if you would like to be a part of that, you are a part of something much larger than the outcomes of a particular venture capital company. You are, through your understanding that you bring and that you gain over time of how the entire ecosystem functions. Not only, obviously, you develop an understanding of the ecosystem in which you find yourself and your community of practice, but that knowledge can be applied from the bottom up to other ecosystems. You will see people become experts, quote unquote, at ecosystem building. I believe that is much more of a challenge than many will believe. But if you tack a title on your business card, you can do anything, right? So personally, I think the bottom up real world experience view of this process and the ability to impact that process through demonstrated expertise and on the job training, real learning by our EiRs makes for each of those EiRs a very rich tapestry of curriculum vitae to bring to future clients, other ecosystems, and so on. So I think the business case for individual EiRs to participate is fairly clear, although still has some risk based on future outcomes, which are difficult to guarantee, of course. But the benefit to an ecosystem in the making, I think it's hard to argue against that. So that's the story. I'm really hoping that we can relaunch the Genius Roundtable for 2024 with more entrepreneurial innovators that are doing different things, not solopreneurs, but more business owners, ongoing concerns across different verticals. Like I said, not everything is tech. I am too focused on tech, and I'm trying to focus on something other than tech with the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. I'm focusing on something other than tech with this Cafe Genius platform, trying to understand the ecosystem, not as a software architect, not as a computer nerd, but as an entrepreneur in the ecosystem. So understanding economics, understanding data, understanding trajectories. What does it really mean if things are like this today and like that tomorrow? Measuring impact of changes that could be made, and the list goes on. These are things we talked about at the first roundtable cohort, not so much in the second cohort, the second 3 month, the second quarter of 2023. And like I said, it kind of fell apart after that. So actually engaged, interested, and interesting people who could be the future of our entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem, I believe are critical, and more time and energy needs to be spent on developing that cohort, that cadre of specialists. They are the future. But then so are our entrepreneurs. Kind of stepped on my own line there. All right. Well, thank you for listening to today's episode. It's coming up on the end of 2023. So we'll see how 2024 gets started. If you are interested in being a part of the Genius Roundtable, you should reach out. You can send me an email. Hugo, DHUGO at cafegenius.org, CAFEGEINIUS.org, Cafe Genius. Why 2 F's? Because Cafe Genius was formed and named, inspired by Cafe Centro, which only recently closed. The world hopes temporarily. Cafe Centro in the South Park in San Francisco, near the baseball park. South Park was where Twitter was started, sort of, thanks to some coffee shop working with the laptop and a discussion that ensued. It is a place of ideation and innovation, and it's something we need here in Vegas. And then Genius was inspired by the Genius lunches, which took place now and then during the downtown project. And so some of us, we get together for lunch now and then. What are you working on? What's going on? Very casual, no set attendance list or anything. I combine the two, Cafe Genius. This is an effort to take what people know and apply it to what we could know and what we could be moving forward. And impresarios, by the way, not a typical spelling, but a valid one. If you look, you'll find it, are people who are doing these things, entrepreneurs, innovators, and so on. So ideally, I am talking to you, but I would love to also speak with you. And if you'd like to be on an episode sometime to talk about any of the things we've been talking about, come on down. You can email me at the same address, Hugo. You can email info at Cafe Genius. You can email media at Cafe Genius. I will see them all. So on that note, I thank you for listening, and do remember that there is a Buy Me a Coffee link, mostly so that you can find this episode, this show, this program, the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program, the Quaggling Sand audio program, and the FFS Talk audio program. These are all weekly productions. Give them a listen. Tell your friends. And then go out and start a company.